Okay, so we want to talk about user testing, and I'm just going to kind of go over some basic concepts first, and then we'll look at how to create a simple form using Google Forms. We'll get into that in a little bit. I'm sure you guys have Google accounts, but if not, you can make one, or there's other ways that you could create a form. But anyway, let's talk about some of the basics of what we want to do with user testing first, and then I'll go over creating a form, which is pretty easy to do. Um, so yeah, we've been kind of like focused on production throughout the semester, and that makes sense. There's a lot of things that we have to do to make a game. And so we've been thinking about all the different things that go into a game. So we've been thinking about things like positive and negative feedback, progression and emergence, although we haven't quite gotten to that bit yet. We'll talk about that next week. But we've talked about goals and rewards and obstacles and level design principles and other aspects of creating the game. And so we've been working on these games with those ideas in mind. And one of the things we want to do is see how well our game works. And so games are very different than other types of media because they have to be played by a user. So, feedback is an important aspect of all creative processes, whether you're making a painting or making a film or anything like that. But with games, it's especially important because we need to understand how the player actually plays the game, and we especially need to know, if the player, runs into things that don't make sense or they don't know how to proceed in the game. If you have a painting that's kind of hard to understand, that's okay because everybody's just looking at the painting. But if you have a game that's hard to play, it makes it a little more challenging because you don't get to experience the whole game. So we want to understand how people are experiencing our game and get feedback, and then incorporate that into how we change the game. And sometimes that's really simple. Sometimes it's just making the character slower or faster, or making it less or more difficult. But sometimes it can be more complex. So yeah, we want to make sure our game is playable. So we want to get good feedback from our users, and in order to do that, we need to ask good questions and kind of direct their attention in specific ways. It's not enough just to say like, did you like the game? We have to like figure out more about how they experience the game. And we also need to see the difference between a game that doesn't work and a game that has issues with playability. So if your game has bugs, that's one thing. And in a lot of ways, that's easier to fix. Like when I was playing Sky's game, I got stuck in the platforms, and that's probably just like a little spacing issue. That's probably easy to fix. And once you see that happens, you can go in and make sure it doesn't happen again. That's an easy thing to fix. So bugs are things that we don't intend. A bug is something that doesn't work the way we want it to do. We want it to. And again, those things, we can see them and then we can fix them. The thing that's a little bit harder to fix and understand is the actual experience of playing the game. So if a game is like too hard or too easy or too fast or too slow, those are things that we will have to do a lot of testing to fix. It's not just one obvious change that we need to make. So some things to look for. Does the player understand the basic controls and movement? So most games use a similar language with similar buttons and similar keys that do certain things. So we can kind of hope that the player will be able to figure it out. But if the player is not able to understand how to play the game, if they don't know which buttons to press or what buttons do what, that's something that we need to learn early on. And then does the player understand the basic goals of the game? So if the player enters the game world and they don't know where they're supposed to go or what they're supposed to be doing, and they're kind of lost or they're trying to figure out what to do, that's something that we want to be aware of. We can also look at how long the player is going to play for, and whether they make it to the end of the experience. So these are two kind of different but important questions. One is like, if our game is really fun, the player may play over and over again. They may play more than once. They may want to play a bunch of times. If the player just gives up and they don't make it to the end, that could be for different reasons. Maybe the game's too hard, but maybe it's too long and it's kind of boring, or maybe they lose interest. Those are the kind of things that we want to be able to figure out. So we can ask how long the player is supposed to play for. There's no like rule about how long a game is supposed to be played for. Our games are, we're just making them this semester, so they're not necessarily going to take forever. So you want to have an idea of how long the game should be played for, and then see if the users, what they say, matches your idea. So if you think the game should be a 20-minute long game, and people are saying, oh, I did it in 2 minutes, then that tells you that your idea of how long the game should be played is a little bit off. So then you kind of have to adjust. You might want the game to be like an hour-long experience, and if people are saying actually it takes me like 5 hours, then that might be too long. So it's not just how long the game is played, but also what is the expectation. So we want to understand what we're expecting, and then see what people say. So a few things to keep in mind when we're doing user testing, and these are important things just for understanding the feedback. Obviously, everybody who plays your game is going to have a different level of experience. Some people will be really, really good. Some people might be, the world champion, like Fortnite player or something like that. But some people are going to have never played a game before. And you don't really know. You could ask them, like, how good at gaming are you? But people, may have different ideas about how good they are at playing a game. That might not necessarily be true. So we can't really assume any kind of like level of skill or familiarity. So we can't disregard user feedback by saying, oh, they just don't know how to play games, or, they're just, they don't get it, or something like that. Even if somebody is really bad and has never played a video game before, your game should still be able to guide the player into understanding how to play, and it should be clear to that player. So if a player says it's confusing or they died too many times, we may have this reaction that like, oh, they just, aren't good at playing games, but we have to accept what they say and try to learn from it. So we have to take their feedback at face value. So we can look for different types of feedback in our form. Quantitative feedback is a good way of comparing things. So things like how long did a person play for, that can be reduced to a number. And so it's a good way to get some basic details about the game. You can get averages, you can see if everybody agrees or if people tend to disagree. So quantitative feedback is good for things like the length of the gameplay or players rating the game. So if everybody says, this was a 5 on the difficulty scale, you can be pretty sure that the game might be too hard. Whereas if you ask players how difficult it is and you see a range of different scores, then that's probably a good sign. So quantitative feedback is good for things that have numbers that can express something like the difficulty, the amount of time played, other components. And that's a really good way to compare users' experiences with across different types of players. Qualitative feedback is written or verbal feedback that can't be captured by a single number or scale. And so this is a good place to get more specific feedback from players. They might describe specific issues that they ran into when they were playing the game. They might say nice things about the game. They might say they like the graphics. They may say things that you hadn't thought about. A lot of times people will make connections to other games or references to other things that you didn't think of before, and that can be useful for understanding how people perceive the sort of language of games that you're using and what people are seeing when they're playing your game. So we'll get some quantitative feedback or qualitative feedback that looks like that. So another thing to do is our surveys are not going to be super long. So you want to think about what's important to me with this game, and then make sure to ask users about their experience of the things that are important. So if it's really important to you that the game has a good story, then you should ask about the story. If it's more important to you that the game is fun, then you should ask things about the gameplay. And so we're not going to have like a super long survey. We just want 5 to 10 questions to get some feedback on the game. And so you want to make sure to pick questions that are important to you, what you value as a game designer. So we want to make sure to frame our questions so that we're not leading people to, say that they like the game or dislike the game. We don't want to be like, oh, what was your favorite level? Because that kind of implies that they like the game. We'll just say, what level did you like the most? Or, what was the most interesting level? We want to use kind of like neutral language. Um, we can get kind of both specific feedback with quantitative feedback, but also ambiguous questions so that people will just say, whatever's on their mind, and that'll reveal things that we may not have thought about before. So now what I want to do is go over how to create a little survey in Google, a little form, and so we can add that to our itch page, and then share that. So when we send somebody the itch link, they can see the survey link on the page, and then they can easily fill it out. So I'm going to stop recording and start again. So this is in a separate video. So these will go together, but you can review one or the other separately.